So these are the desert sands of Huacachina, Peru. 5 square miles of nothing but sand dunes as far as the eye can see. Some of these mountains of sand actually rise as high as 900 feet. And the question that I asked myself was, what am I doing here? How did I even get here? 3,000 miles away from home, 50 miles away from Paracas, and Paracas is in the middle of nowhere. How did I get here? If you notice, by the way, I'm wearing, it's a little hard to see, but because the sand is so fierce and intense and being blown everywhere by the wind, I'm wearing a bandana over my face and goggles and a Peruvian explorer hat. So how did I get here? Jimmy. That's a good place to start. Jimmy. It's all Jimmy's fault. Jimmy is a operator, in every sense of the word, of a small tour shack in Paracas. And Jimmy said to me, "I'll fix you up, boss. What do you want? Anything you want. Where do you want to go? You want a dune buggy? You want a dune buggy ride? Buggy ride? Want a buggy ride? Sure, dune buggy ride. That sounds awesome." Only the dune buggy was more like a roll bar with wheels. And it's a roll bar with wheels because they take the dune buggy and they drive it up the side of these 900 feet mountains of sand, and then they drive down again at a 45-degree angle. And sand, which you've probably never driven in, I know I never had, sand is very hard to get traction going in, and sometimes it slips and falls, and when it falls, it rolls, and it rolls down the mountain of sand. So I want to show you the gear shift knob. I took a picture of it so I could send it to my lawyer if I needed to, or my survivors. And you see the sand, too, in the bottom of the footwell. That's because we went up to the top of the mountain of sand. And then at that point, the driver comes around to the back of the dune buggy, and he pulls out surfboards and waxes them down. And the occupants of the buggy, including me, surf down the mountains of sand. That's what we were there to do. Yeah, it's great. And they meet you, the buggy driver comes back down the mountain of sand and meets you at the bottom after you've surfed your way down. And that's really awesome unless the buggy breaks down, which is exactly what happened. The buggy broke down, they had to radio for help, and it was a long walk back to Paracas to murder Jimmy. So I had plenty of time to think. And what I thought was, how did I get here, really? How did I end up here? And I think it all started when I turned 50. Now, some of you, I think, are over 50. Some of you are probably looking at coming up to 50 someday. I don't know how you feel about that. I wasn't happy. I didn't want to turn 50. You know that feeling when you see an hourglass and sand is running through it, and there's that sort of horrible moment when suddenly there's more sand in the bottom than there is in the top, and the next thing that happens is a little depression starts to form at the top. Or in my case, a big depression. And I'd like to tell you that I handled my midlife crisis with the same savoir-faire and aplomb as James Bond about to take a sip of a poison martini. But except for the heavy drinking, I didn't handle it like James Bond. I handled it more like this guy. Around the same time, my cat died, and my father-in-law died, and a very important friendship kind of hit the rocks and broke up, and that was the end of that. And my house flooded. Pipe burst, all the floors ruined, lake inside my house. So I kind of knew where I was, right? That rock hard feeling under your ass tells you you've reached it again. It's rock bottom, baby. Get used to it, because you'll be staying a while. Now, fortunately, I had hit rock bottom before, so I kind of knew the terrain. And the other good thing was I had something I had never had before: meditation cushion. How many of you meditate? Anybody? Two, couple, three, four? Good. All right. So I had never meditated before, but I had started taking a meditation class. I had a meditation teacher named Subog. And Subog taught me how to meditate, and it was great because he said it's really very simple. All you do is breathe. You sit and you breathe, in and out, in and out. You focus on your breath as it goes into your body. You focus on your breath as it goes out of your body. And pretty soon, in the process of focusing on your breath, you begin to notice that instead you're thinking. You're thinking about your grocery list. You're thinking about what you should have said to your boss yesterday when he said that thing to you, and you should have said this. And if you had said that to him, boy, that would have showed him. And man, you would have been the king of that office. And back to the breath. There I go again. Back to the breath. And when we had our eyes closed one day, Subog told us a really interesting thing. He said that he was talking about the thoughts that we have that we need to drop, and that most of the time our thoughts are one of two things. We're either rehashing the past or we're rehearsing the future. And there's a problem with the past and the future. The problem with the past is that neuroscientists tell us that when you remember the past, you're not actually remembering the thing that happened to you. You are actually neurologically remembering the last time you remembered it. And so your memories kind of get fuzzy, and they acquire the patina of myth. In fact, nothing in this talk tonight might be true at all. Who knows? It's all in the past. But that's how stories get told and retold until you don't actually know if they're true or not. So that's the past that you're thinking about. Fiction. As for the future, well, the future hasn't happened yet. So anything, Subog said, anything you might think about the future is pure fantasy. So if the past is fiction and the future is fantasy, he said, what's real? Right now. Right now is the only real thing. And I'll get out of your way for that. Yes. So the present moment, aside from being the only real thing, is also your only real point of power, right? It's the moment in which anything is possible. If you're really deeply in the present moment, then you can think anything you want to. You're unchained by the past and the future. You have total power over your thoughts and total power over your reactions to whatever happens to you. The present moment. So I found myself at a point of power like this in January of the following year, here at this point of power, which is St. Andrew's Pub in Longwood. It's a very seedy, very smoky Brit pub with darts and ale and people smoking. And at this pub, I reconnected with that friend I mentioned where the relationship had broken up and hit the rocks. And we reconnected. We kind of, talked through our difficulty. We forgave each other. And I realized in that conversation that my lack of forgiveness of him had really been punishing me and limiting me. And I realized that night something very important, which is that I had been playing a very, very small game. And I thought, what if I tried to play a bigger game? What if I tried to be more and do more and become the person that I felt deep down that I might be deep down inside? What if I tried to do it, be all I could be? What if? I had absolutely no idea how I was going to do that, but I was resolved to try. So I did. First thing I did was I joined the neighborhood association, and there was this mean Nazi neighbor who was lording it over everybody, and we kicked him out, and we took over the neighborhood association, and boom, that was great. No more nasty letters about my gutters. Doesn't seem like much, but it meant something to me. Then I was in Toastmasters, and I ran for president of the club, and to my shock, horror, and dismay, I won. and now I was president of the local Toastmasters with all the duties and lands and kingdoms appertaining thereto. So that was awesome. And then the next thing I did was I started working out again, and I hired a trainer this time to really make sure I got in shape. So the trainer kind of led me to the next thing, which was doing mud and obstacle races. So this is like 6 miles of barbed wire and ice pits and monkey bars and mud and slime, and I hurt myself. I fell off the monkey bars and injured myself pretty badly. The first aid tent said they'd never seen anything like it. They didn't even know what to do about it. Spray some Bactine on it. But it was great, right? It was great. I never had a better time in my entire life than doing this. So that was awesome. And then the final bit of awesomeness was one night when I went down to Tampa to an event they were having there called PechaKucha Night or PechaKucha Night. And I don't have to explain to most of you what it is because many of you have spoken at it and or attended it faithfully. But I'll tell you what happened in Tampa. They had 8 speakers, and for those of you who don't know, I'll explain it just quickly. There are 8 or 9 speakers at the event. They have nothing in common with each other. I think this first night in Tampa, there was a haircutter talking about the history of haircutting, a guy talking about how cell phones are the next wave of human communications that will change everything about how we do things, and this was practically 10 years ago, so that was news. They have nothing in common with each other, but what they do have in common is each speaker has 20 slides, and the slides are on a timer. They unroll 20 seconds per slide. The presenter has no control over it. They have to sync up what they're saying to the 20-second timing, and their talk is done in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. So that was super cool. But the really cool thing that night was I looked at the audience, right? 250 people came to this event, and I stood at the doorway talking to the organizer as they came in, and every single person who came through that door was somebody I wanted to know and get to know better and hang out with. 250 of the coolest people I had ever seen in one place. And I thought, wow, this is awesome. I wish somebody would do this in Orlando. So I came back to Orlando and kind of hoped that somebody would put the event on. And, it wasn't happening. And I, be more, do more, have more, right? I thought, well, I'm going to have to be the change, as Gandhi said. And so I started the event. And this is the shameless plug part of the evening for my event, which is November 9th at the Dr. Phillips Center, PechaKucha Orlando. So we started PechaKucha Orlando in October. Is it still October? Yes, I believe it is. So this month, 8 years ago. And our first event was in a very down market club, the Cameo. It's now Snap Orlando Gallery, and it's very elegant and swanky, but back then it was just a very sketchy nightclub. And were any of you at that one, at the first one? No. That's, of course you weren't, because nobody was. There were like 31 paying customers, or maybe 31 people in the room total, I'm not sure. It was small, and yet you could tell that it was going to become something great. You could feel it. And you could feel it despite the fact that we had AV problems. The nightclub owner said he would do the AV for me. It's like, hey, boss, what you want, AV? Yeah, okay. So he did the AV, and it actually shut down in the middle of the best talk, and the best speaker had no slides, so she just did her talk in the dark. It was a mess. But you could feel the seeds of greatness. And those seeds have sprouted. Now we're at the Dr. Phillips Center. We do it 3 times a year for 500 people at a pop. We have 2 performances. We get 2 standing ovations every night. If you look on the left, you'll see Josh here getting his standing ovation in March. And it's great. It's everything I hoped it would be and more. So because I was the host of PechaKucha Orlando, I got invited to speak at TED Orlando. And I'm sure you probably know what TED is, but if you don't, it's Technology, Education, and Design Conference that, much like PechaKucha, is held all around the world. And the local version in Orlando is very well done, and I was invited to be a speaker at it in 2012. So I gave the closing talk at TED, and in terms of doing TED, I started researching it because I wanted to make sure I did it right, and I went to the TED website to do that. And has anyone not been to the TED website? It's pretty ubiquitous, right? They have talks on that site from every local chapter all over the world. You can find them by city or by topic or by speaker. And there are literally thousands and thousands of talks from the last 10 years from all over the world, all except one talk. And in researching TED, I discovered that they had embroiled themselves in controversy because they had actually pulled a talk off their site, and people claimed censorship. And then there was a lot of back and forth, and they put it back on the site, but they didn't put it back in Whitechapel, or the city where it was done. They put it in a sort of obscure side pocket of, like a closet on the TED website, where still couldn't see it. And I was pretty curious about that, so I YouTubed and I found it, and I listened to it. It was a talk by this guy, Graham Hancock, somebody I had never heard of before. And my only interest in it was, what was he saying that was so controversial that they had to pull it off their website? And his talk was called The War on Consciousness, ironically. And what he said in his talk was that consciousness is interesting because no one knows what consciousness is. No one really knows what it is or where it comes from or how it's generated. And one theory is that maybe the brain generates it the same way that a projector generates an image, or a television set generates your evening's entertainment. But there's another theory, and that theory is that maybe consciousness, the brain is more like a receiver, and consciousness comes from somewhere else. And because no one knows what consciousness is or where it comes from, this theory is equally valid, right? And Graham said, well, if it comes from somewhere else, what if you could turn the dial? What if you could start receiving a different channel and get your consciousness from somewhere else? What about that? And he said that's what he did. He went to Peru, to the Amazon, and he drank a substance there called ayahuasca, which is an indigenous medicine that enables you to have visions. And the visions are very healing, and the experience is like, they say it's like 20 years of psychotherapy in one night. So I'll tell you a little bit about ayahuasca, because I do my research. So ayahuasca is made from a vine called capi and a leaf called chacruna. And they are mixed together. They're pounded first. Then they're put in a pot with a bunch of water. They're boiled down for like over a day until it's boiled down into a viscous brown liquid. And one interesting thing is, the Amazon, right? How many plants are in the Amazon? There are thousands and thousands of plants in the Amazon. How did they hit upon the exact two that, when mixed together, would enable you to have visions? And if you ask the natives how they know, they'll tell you, the plant told us. So, maybe. It's as good an explanation as any. So, here's the thing. When you drink ayahuasca, the first thing that happens is you throw up. And sometimes you have diarrhea. Sometimes you have both at once. The natives call it la purga, the purge. And you're not just purging whatever you had the misfortune to have eaten recently, but you are purging your past. You're purging your demons. You're purging your bad karma. You're purging your trauma and difficulty of your life. And that's not very pretty. So people have, they have visions of, terrifying visions of, as their ego breaks down, of snakes eating their arms or dragons attacking them, terrifying visions of giant insects. It's not a recreational drug, and that's a point I would just like to make in the interest of not getting my talk pulled off the website. It's not a recreational drug. It's serious medicine. No one in their right mind would ever do it for fun. And that was basically something that Graham said enabled him to be a better husband and a better man by doing this. Well, so I listened to his talk, and I had never heard of him or ayahuasca. I just wanted to see what they had pulled off their website. So I watched this 20-minute talk, and I had this extremely strong reaction inside of me in two parts. Part one, wow, I really want to meet this guy and talk to him more about this. I got some questions. And two, wow, I really, really would kind of like to do this drug, medicine. I want to do it. And how's that going to happen, really? You know, it's probably not going to happen. I had never done a psychedelic drug. And some of you may find that difficult to believe, but no, I had never done any sort of psychedelic. And I was a little worried about that because that stuff can mess you up. And what if something happened to my brain? You know, I make a living with my brain. I need it. I'm using it. I was scared, frankly. And so I asked my wife, you know, what did she think? And she didn't like the idea. So I went. Be more, do more, become your best, highest self, right? That's what I was after. That's what I was looking for. So I went. And that was how I ended up here, in the yard of a shaman named Diego, in a house, in a compound at the foot of the Andes in the Sacred Valley in Cusco, Peru, one beautiful October evening. So Diego came and greeted us and brought us inside into his living room. There were people from all over the world, all ages, all types, every type of person there is, about 30 total. And we sat on his couches and chairs, and he talked to us, and he said, you know, what the ceremony was going to be like for us. He said it would take about 5-6 hours. It would start about 9 p.m. It would not be in his house. It would be somewhere else in the compound. We would be given a blanket and a bucket. The blanket was to keep warm. You know what the bucket's for. He said, nobody has ever died from taking ayahuasca. It's just medicine. You'll meet the spirit goddess. There's nothing to fear. And then he took us to the hut. So the hut was this sort of, picture an igloo with a thatched roof, a big round room with a small corridor leading up to it where you take off your shoes, you actually get your bucket, and you proceed into the room. And as this happened, as we got to the hut, night began to fall. And if you've ever been up in the mountains, you know, night falls pretty quickly. It was 1 minute it was light, the next minute it was pretty dark. There were coyotes in the mountains around us. The coyotes began to howl. The dogs in Diego's compound began to howl back at the coyotes, and we went into the hut to see what would happen. Diego sat more or less in the center. He spread out a blanket in front of him. He had candles so that we could see in the dark. And as you can tell, he has a roll of toilet paper and a bucket, because he's done this before. So we each took a turn. We were sitting around the room. We went around the room. He one by one brought us up. So came to be my turn. It's very dark in this room. There's only candlelight. So I stood up, kind of threaded my way through the buckets, walked up to his blanket. I knelt in front of him, and he blessed me, and he handed me this. So I want to tell you how it tasted, but that's difficult to describe. It tasted like dirt and mud and twigs and forest rot and dead frogs and gasoline and plastic and, maybe a hint of chocolate. It was probably the worst thing I've ever tasted in my entire life, but you don't savor it, you gulp it down. So I gave the traditional toast of Kausaipa, I gulped it down, I went back to my seat and sat down and waited to see what would happen next. So I had heard stories about people having these terrifying ego breakdown visions of a lady on the alien tour, a nice English lady, sort of a tea drinking, quiet English lady, said, "Oh, there were snakes and they were eating my arms and my legs," and I was. She showed me the drawing of the snakes eating her arms and legs, and I was like, "That sounds great," So I was like, "Bring it on, baby! I'm ready. I'm ready for whatever it is." But the fact is, I did not see anything terrifying like this. Bit of an anticlimax, but what I saw was more like a light show. And the lights stretched off in all directions. They were kind of pulsating, colored lights, and it became apparent after a bit that they were in a pattern, and the pattern seemed to be inside of like a structure, like picture lights inside a skyscraper, like inside of a geometric structure. And I found myself wondering if maybe that rigid structure was my personality and the light was my light that couldn't quite get out of that rigid structure. But I really didn't have a lot of time to ponder that because I soon became aware of a presence. And the presence was sort of like this, like if you closed your eyes and a woman leaned in very close and kind of whispered in your ear. That was what it felt like. I don't recall necessarily seeing, but I recall definitely like interacting. And she didn't exactly whisper in my ear, it was more of a telepathic communication. But I felt she was there. She was there, she was communicating with me, and she loved me and wanted the best for me. And she had something important to say to me. And here's the first thing she said. It was like words on a billboard. It was literally like huge, like stop seeking. And fast forward, when I got home a couple weeks later, and I told my wife this story, and I said the first thing the Spirit Goddess said was stop seeking. She slammed her hand on the kitchen table and went, "Thank God." You didn't have to go to Peru, honey. Yeah, stop seeking. Stop trying to find something over the next hill. Stop trying to get an answer. Stop trying to find the key to whatever it is. There is no key. Or if there is, this lifetime isn't going to give you any more than you've already gotten. You have passed the test. You know everything you need to know this time. All you need to do is maybe a little better job of walking the talk. That was kind of the message. And the next thing that happens in an ayahuasca experience is what they call the life review, where the Spirit Goddess will show you your life, almost like a movie, scenes from your life unrolling, like you're watching a film of yourself. And so she showed me the life review. And yeah, it wasn't that pretty, because it was scenes of me not really walking the talk, scenes of me interacting with other people and not being that good with them. Not as good as I could be, not my best and highest self. Seeking maybe to be my best and highest self while at the same time failing to get the basics of this right. And it was humbling, but it was done with a certain amount of, I want to call it love, call it tough love. It's done with tough love, yeah. And then the final part, which happens to everyone who does ayahuasca, is, and they experience it differently, but I experienced a very intense connection with the earth. I felt the mountains around us and under us very strongly. And normally, you know, when you look at rocks and dirt, you just see them as rocks and dirt. That's certainly how I always saw them. But all of a sudden, I realized that rocks and dirt are not just rocks and dirt, that they're alive, that they're vibrating with silent love for us. And their love is like her love. You know, it's tough love. It's there for us, but it's not there to make us necessarily super comfortable, right? You got to work for it. And I felt this very strong connection to the earth. And I guess I felt in a certain way that I was part of the earth, that I too somehow was those mountains, that it was the same thing. I just had a different kind of consciousness than the plant had, than the earth had. I also felt a sense of oneness, and I don't even like the word oneness because it gets really overused, but it was a oneness in a sense of realizing that, you know, how we treat the earth and other people is the same way we treat ourselves. We treat other people in the earth and ourselves as disposable, as temporary, as something that we can hurt. And worst of all, we think that we can hurt other people and hurt the earth and somehow not hurt ourselves. And guess what? Wrong, wrong, wrong. But then there was the aftermath, you know? The aftermath after the ceremony, when I was putting it together in my mind, and I felt this amazing sense of inner peace and a feeling that I was all right, you know, and the earth is all right, and everything's going to be fine. And I have a friend who says the perfect thing that describes what I kind of came away with. He says, all you need to have is an RPA, a relaxed, playful attitude. Because we're here to have fun, basically. That's the point of this. And this is a miraculous universe if we just open our eyes to it and look a little more deeply. Anything can happen. Miracles can happen, and they do happen. It's not theoretical, they happen. Miracles. Here's a miracle. In April, I had watched a TED Talk by a guy I had never heard of before, and 6 months later, I'm sitting in a restaurant in Cusco, Peru, next to Graham Hancock. And he is asking me to tell him about my experience and my journey. And I told him, you know, when I turned 50, I felt like the sand was slipping through my hourglass. I felt like I had nothing left. I had no reason to go on. I had no reason to live. But I said, you know, actually I don't feel that way anymore. I think I changed my mind. Yeah, changed my mind. So eventually they brought it apart. They fixed the dune buggy up, and they got us going again. And, you know, we started bopping around the giant hills of Wakachina. The driver said, why don't we head back into town? And it turns out, by the way, that in town, there's a town. What do you know? In the middle of all that sand, there's an oasis. There's a beautiful little lake. And around the lake, there's a boardwalk. And on the boardwalk, there's a bar. And the dune buggy driver said, hey, you want to, you know, we can stop and get a beer. And what do you say? And I said, yeah, you know, maybe not quite yet. We got all this sand here. I came to surf.